Welcome to the Student Experience podcast. Today, I'm joined by the very inspiring Eddie Blass. Eddie is founder and CEO of the Inventorium, which is a social enterprise that provides online education system to meet the needs of young adults for both high school, university, internships and employments, essentially developing their skills through personal learning plans to take control of creating their future. In short, it's a revolutionary new approach that is transforming the experience of learning, particularly in an online environment. In addition to her own enterprise, Eddie is also the Pro Vice Chancellor Academic at Torrens University, a CEO activator, and has extensive experience in the academic and professional development education fields, both here and in Australia and also in the UK. Welcome, Eddie.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here. Thank you.
And I can see that rethinking the online education experience is something that you are extremely passionate about. Can you share with us what this new paradigm of schooling or learning can look like?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you for starting with this. Because with COVID and so many schools going into lockdown, what we saw was what was called a shift to online learning. And it kind of annoys me because it wasn't really online learning. What it was classroom-based learning delivered online. And I think it's really important that people understand there is a difference because online learning as a paradigm shift requires a change in pedagogy. And it's a different approach to teaching and learning. And it's very much self-driven, pedagogical approach when it's right, because kids spend so long online. One of the first things we do with the kids that we talk to in the Inventorium is ask them when they've got 2 hours at home and they're sitting on YouTube, what do they watch? And parents may think they're going to talk about music or fashion, or you'd be surprised at what kids actually will learn on their own when they decide they're interested in something or they're fascinated about something. And it's never anything that's in the school curriculum. And that's what I find so interesting about the online learning paradigm, is it allows people to really learn in depth in areas that they are interested in learning in. And then it actually becomes about us as facilitators and teachers in helping students learn in that manner and develop that knowledge and how to process and question and understand the validity of what they're reading and the value of what they're reading and how to pull together different strains of thought rather than teaching them content. And what we saw in COVID was that content delivery model being driven through online mechanisms. And that really isn't the essence of online learning. If you want to use the technology for what it's good at, use it for what it's good at, which is allowing people to discover.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting because there is so much content online and it's so accessible. Rather than recreating, why aren't we facilitating that learning and that processing and that discernment as well? I mean, my girls, they're only young, but they'll see something or they'll hear something, and whether it's online or from someone, they just assume it's correct.
And that's the thing, is actually teaching people to question. Is that correct? Does that sound right? Is there any evidence for that? What could that be based on? I mean, even yesterday, I was having a discussion with a student, and I can't even remember how we got to the discussion, but we were talking about whether or not you can predict someone's appearance from their zodiac sign. So we just Googled that, and there were loads of sites on it, right? Like, can you say something like a Gemini? Is that a valid thing? They look like a Leo, right? So we Googled and saw what we got. And then we looked at Google Scholar to see if there was anything really sort of scientific studies to do with star signs, astrology or astronomy, trying to link the two, anything to do with the cosmos and people's physical appearance. And we couldn't find anything to do with physical appearance, but we did find an awful lot of studies to do with personality traits. So whether or not people just haven't moved to physical appearance in the academic world or not, but there certainly seems to be something to do with the stars and how we behave So, that's then got us to the point of thinking, well, could there actually be something in this then of saying you look like a Gemini?
Or you're acting like a Gemini.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it was, so we had a great hours tutorial looking at this.
Awesome.
And they've gone off to do more research on it and look into it in more detail and see if they can find anything. But that was, just from, if you had that, if someone said that in a school classroom setting, it would probably just have been shut down.
Yeah.
Like,
don't be silly, or don't be woo-woo, or whatever it is. Yeah.
But actually, we looked at, can that actually be a scientific question? Can you get to the roots of that? And really made it into a great learning experience as to whether or not that would be a sort of valid statement that somebody could make.
Yeah, I love that.
that's what online learning, and this is where the Inventorium is so different, and the personal learning plans is, in order to really be a motivated learner, and it's the same true for like research, learning research methodology is boring as hell unless you've got a question you're interested in answering, and then you get really into what's the best way of answering the question, and how do the answers to the question differ according to how you ask it and who you ask it of. And then research becomes really interesting, and it's so that curiosity with learning as well. Someone's interested in finding out about something, all the content we need, plus a load we don't need, is on the internet. So it's then about working out, how do we know what's the bits we need and what are the bits that we don't need?
Yeah, and I think that sort of personalizing to interest is really key as well, because a lot of what we're trying to teach, or what you're trying to teach for Inventorium, is not so much the content. It's about the life skills, which we're assuming people have when they finish school, but they often don't, because it's just been fed to them and they've been told what to do and how to do it. So I know for me, and it's a bit random, a bit like the horoscopes version, but I kind of never really got a lot of history stuff when I was at school. And when I was an adult and I started reading Jane Austen, and in one of them, Persuasion, they're talking about, they've just come back from this war and all that. And I started wondering, what was this war? And then I discovered, when I had a look in, it was the Napoleonic Wars. And I was like, wow, I thought that was like 100 or 200 years earlier. And then you started thinking about, well, what else was going on at that time, and what were the fashions, and what was this? And it's amazing how that bit of curiosity suddenly opens you up to so much more knowledge once you start understanding how to ask the questions.
And that's the thing. I think if we can generate curiosity amongst young people, then that is the student experience. I mean, that to me is the essence of it, is helping them explore their curiosity. And also, to a degree, helping them deal with the answers they find in their curiosity, because sometimes, the world is not a nice place.
Yeah.
And the internet can be quite unfiltered in terms of what people may find that can distress them. So dealing with that as well. But we can't protect people from that. It needs to be there.
Yeah, it needs to be another skill, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And and this kind of comes into that as well. I'm a big believer that industrial age approach that we have to education doesn't serve us in our innovation and ideas age, and nor does taking an offline experience and putting it online. So what does a successful online learning experience look like? And what do we need to change in our approach for around online for it to be a success?
So with the Inventorium, what we've discovered is two things. Firstly, that personalized approach to the curriculum. So content really doesn't matter. If the student's curious, they will find the content. So the content actually doesn't matter to the teacher either. So we do not have to be experts in any content area in order to teach it, or in order to help facilitate the student learn. I use the word teach because people are teachers in schools, and it's a huge transition. So the second thing that we find with the Inventorium is, and this may surprise you, the teacher's the most important person in the whole system. The teacher's more important than the curriculum, the content, the searching, the system, anything. And it's that one-to-one relationship that's built up. So there are three things that the Inventorium does fundamentally differently to school. Firstly, the students decide what they're going to learn, and we work very much within South Australia and the Northern Territory because we have SAFE as opposed to the HSC or VCE, and the SAFE certificate is immensely flexible in what is acceptable, provided the teachers are prepared to put the work into writing the curriculum documents and the assessment processes and stuff, which in a school, the way that schools are structured, an individual teacher does not have time to do that for every single kid.
Yeah.
So this is why we do things differently. So we work with what the kids' interests are. The second thing is we work with them on a one-to-one basis. So it's completely personalized to them, and we go at their pace. So there's never a child being pushed too fast or too slow, being held back. They're never bored at the pace they're going at. We go at the pace they can go at. Most of our kids will complete a SACE within 2.5 years. Some take 3.5 years. We've had a kid do it in 1.5 years who was very bright and on a roll, and that's fine. We don't mind. They stay with us. We offer years 10 to 12 through open access college or in partnership with a school. So the relevance is to the kid, the pace is to the kid, and then the third thing is linked to that teacher thing. The student works with one teacher for everything. So there's no possibility of them falling through a crack because they've got 8 different subjects. They're not brilliant or terrible at anything. They're just mediocre. So they never really hit the teacher's attention anywhere. And they kind of like just do average. And it just, nobody really knows who they are. And that one-to-one relationship is absolutely fundamental because the Inventorium at the moment, we really focus and specialize in kids who, for whatever reason, do not cope with traditional mainstream school. So all of our kids have disengaged and dropped out. And we have a 95% retention rate. So these are kids
huge.
Absolutely refusing to go to school. And that's 95%, and we are fully online. And we actually only meet with the kids 1 hour a week, one-to-one, on a Zoom call. And the rest of the time, we treat them like adult learners, and they behave like adult learners. And I think there's also, if I was going to say there's a fourth thing to it, it would be we treat them like adults, so they behave like adults, as opposed to schools where bells ring. And actually, schools, the last time I was in a school, it kind of reminded me a bit of a prison, in that the corridor was empty, a bell rang, doors open, people were everywhere, bell rang, doors closed, empty. And it was almost like I was like against the wall, just like stood there waiting for the craziness to end before I could move again. And I thought, wow, this is what prisons look like on the telly. It's like people are allowed out, they have to move around, they do so, and then everyone's locked in again. And that I think is, part of the reason why so many kids get anxious at school is that regimented means of dealing with things. And I'm not criticizing schools. And I do think the school system does still work for some kids very well. For those kids who that learning style works for, whether it works for employers in terms of the outcome is another matter.
That's what I was thinking, because it doesn't sound like any workplace I want to work in.
But it's, I have an enormous respect for teachers and schools, and we always work in partnership with schools. We deliberately never set up as a school. Trying to change the school system is incredibly difficult, and I realized that when I started the Inventorium. And it was really a challenge. It started as a challenge because of the high dropout rates and all the stuff, even going back to that famous TED talk by, can't remember his name. He died recently.
Ken Richards.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Ken Robinson.
Robinson, that was it.
Yeah. His TED talk, which was 10 years old, and it's like nothing.
Wow.
And it's like everyone says the system's broken, needs to change, but nobody's changing it. You get little piecemeal things, but no one's systemically changing it. So started from the point of view of, all right, let's look at all the research on why kids drop out of school. and all the research on the future of work and what the skills are that will be needed. And let's design something to bridge those two. And that's, so we never started with what should a school look like. And everything about the future of work says qualifications won't matter, but then we discovered they do at the moment. So that's when we then had to map back to SACE, and we also mapped to VCAL, and we filled in all the gaps and stuff, but VCAL's disappearing. And at the moment, we're actually looking at setting up an RTO, because we're very much about skills-based employability and, motivating young people to be curious for the workplace. And a lot of the VET curriculum is actually better for that, believe it or not.
It's interesting that you say that, because when you first mentioned about the teachers not needing to be the experts in the content, the first thing I thought about was, if you're delivering in the VET system, you need to have had that qualification or higher in order to teach in that, because you need to be the expert. So how does that work?
No, in VET, you need to have had the experience in it. And they take the qualification as a proxy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they take the qualification as a proxy. But if you've actually worked in the industry for 20 years or can demonstrate you have relevant experience in the industry, because otherwise you end up in this situation where nobody can write a new VET qualification because nobody will have done it to be able to teach it.
Yeah.
But yeah, the easiest proxy is that. And certainly in the trades and stuff, you would pretty much, you'd want to know that somebody who was teaching someone to be an electrician was a qualified electrician themselves. But for some of the business VET and stuff, it's not, it's not quite the same.
There you go. And so I guess 10 years on from the Gonski, we took 10 years on from Ken Robinson, but 10 years on from Gonski, we haven't seen the changes needed to bring those recommendations that were in the report to life. So what do you think's behind that? Why isn't the system changing, and what might be a catalyst for the change?
Okay, so I went on a voyage of discovery when I started the Inventorium and actually started to try and deliver it, which was about the fact that education is state mandated, first off. So every state is responsible for educating their own kids. I don't know that many parents know what the implications of that is, but effectively every state has their own exam board that sets their own qualifications. And that's why I said earlier about SACE. South Australia has an amazing person, Professor Martin Westwell, running the SACE board, who's just a genius when it comes to education and assessment. The New South Wales Education Standards Authority, NESA, are not nearly as flexible, and they published a paper recently that Review in New South Wales said it was going to take 10 years to rewrite the curriculum. Well, that's one of the things that's wrong. So that's another 10 years worth of kids learning stuff that's completely irrelevant, because we need 10 years to be able to write that. And I just thought, wow, if we broke the state monopoly on education, and schools could decide which qualifications they got from which state exam board, that would be the first thing that would bring about change so quickly, because it would suddenly be a competitive market. Yeah. And in the UK, that's the way it works. Schools decide which exam board they're going to use for which qualification. And schools will use multiple exam boards. They don't necessarily have to use them all. So you have the state exam board. You then have the state teacher registration board. So because you're registered as a teacher in South Australia, it does not automatically mean you'll be allowed to teach in New South Wales or Queensland, or, because, and when you just think, really? Yeah. So that's another hurdle and barrier, and everyone has their own education quality process as well. And so in terms of the bureaucracy, they all have their own Department of Education, their teacher board, their qualification board, and their quality assurance process. Trying to change those when all four sustain each other is really problematic, because which one changes first? Yeah. They literally all have to change together. And as a sort of bureaucratic process, that's incredibly difficult.
Yeah, so they all have a stake in keeping it as it is.
Because to change would, each one could potentially be threatened by the other if they loosened the boundaries and actually focused on the student instead of the qualification and the delivery. So that's the second thing, is the whole system is set up around the delivery. So schools are actually run by the timetable. And then, so the second thing with that is the school bell. So the timetable and the school bell. So that's why so many COVID online classes failed, because most parents that had more than one child were not able to facilitate multiple Zoom classes at the same time all day while they were trying to work from home, because it just actually, the school bell wasn't ringing in their household, and it didn't, it didn't work like that for people. So with the Inventorium, we say to the kids to actually do sort of 3 hours solid work on the Inventorium a day, and they get through it all. They waste about 6-7 hours at school, because school really, I think COVID has taught us, is about childcare. It's not really about teaching and learning, because if it was, they'd focus everything around the student, and they don't. So the curriculum is driven by teachers and defined by teachers. The delivery mechanism is driven by the timetable, because when you're managing that large number of people in that environment, it's pretty impossible not to do it that way. So it becomes really difficult to do anything else. Peter Hutton did pretty well at Templestowe College in kind of getting rid of all the rules and stuff, because they didn't have classes that were set by year groups, for example. And kids could really choose what curriculum they did, but there was still limits and stuff. But they did have a sort of free, self-directed pedagogical bit as well. And so, the schools working on the Future Schools Alliance are closest to where things could be going. But to bring about the change, we literally have to deconstruct everything we did. And originally, the Inventorium, we tried to partner with schools so that the teachers in schools taught it, and that completely failed. And we couldn't work out why it was failing in schools, but working with kids that were with us. So we then said we would teach the kids in the schools that were doing it, and then it succeeded. And it's almost like when you're a teacher within that system and structure, where you have a curriculum you have to deliver in a set time frame within these hours in a certain way to lots of kids. To shift from that mindset to, and now work one-to-one with this student at their pace doing what they want, is virtually impossible. And every new teacher we get into the Inventorium, it takes them about 6 weeks to lose the, we create anxiety for them. So it takes 6 weeks for them to lose the anxiety of the fact that they do not know what they're going to do when they walk into the tutorial.
Yeah, and it's such a completely different experience, because as you say, it's all prepared and planned, or it's what happens with the student and what we need to do to work with them on that particular moment.
And then we have to go back from the student and create that detailed task sheet and learning and assessment plan to submit to the SACE board. But that's our job. That's the bit that
it's like reverse engineered, isn't it?
Completely. And the SACE board allows that to happen because of the way that SACE is designed. Whereas New South Wales, WA,
Yeah. And so what does that actually mean in terms of for students coming from high school into university, when they're coming from that timetabled, bell ringing schedule to actually into a university environment?
They struggle. They massively struggle. And they want to be told what to do at each point in the way. And actually, in some ways, online learning in university is better for them, because online structure in a university tends to be much more directed and set out in a way that they can follow, and it's more linear.
Yeah.
Whereas when they attend face-to-face, they attend a lecture and they're not so sure what's going to happen, and they haven't got the structure there. And even though there may be learning outcomes and outlines and stuff, it's you just kind of quite don't know what's going to happen, or what your work's going to be for the next session, or what's going to be discussed in a tutorial. And you may have prepared something, but it's not quite right. And When it's online, you can ask a question, you put something up in advance, the tutor can get back to you. When it's face-to-face, you only get that opportunity in the tutorial. And if you misunderstood something and did the wrong thing, then you kind of lost that opportunity. So I actually think online university education in many ways is a kind of better experience, although you don't have that huge social, although I don't know if that huge social life around being in university exists anymore. Everyone's working.
Yeah, and it probably depends on which university and, you know, obviously different age groups and things like that. I know I've studied 4 different degrees, and I've studied in 4 different, I've done the on-campus straight from high school. I've done the by correspondence. I've done the online, online, just like very remote, different time zone, and online, essentially on campus, but you're just meeting on Zoom rather than in a classroom. And yeah, it's interesting how you do seem to have much more structure when you are an online, because you know what you've got to prepare for the next session. And if you ask a silly question, it's not as embarrassing. You know, you're not up front.
Yeah, but also, I mean, so there's 2 things. There's the opportunity to be able to ask the question in the chat instead of having to articulate it, which is really helpful for a lot of international students because they can really think about how they're going to ask the question rather than having to think real time. But secondly, good online does not PowerPoint. Right. And so just one thing I hate is seeing a PowerPoint session delivered online. It's like, oh, that's a video. You know, that's not the whole point of a good online session, is to have a discussion and to get people talking. And when it's really good, you've got one discussion going verbally and a chat discussion going as well. So you've actually got 2 streams going, and people with the chat can just, you know, like deposit their stream of consciousness at the point of time that they have it, without having to put their hand up and wait to talk. And then the facilitator can get back to it and discuss it, you know, and work through the chat afterwards if they're in a really good conversation at that time. So it really opens up, bizarrely, it opens up the opportunity for conversation when it's online, that isn't always there when it's face to face.
Yeah, and I think also it creates a safety net for people who may not learn or communicate or manage things in that same way that, you know, is expected in a face-to-face experience.
Yeah.
Well, that's all the questions I have. Is there anything else you'd like to share? I know you've got so many different things on, and we'd love to hear some more.
Look, I think, you know, what's interesting is with the Inventorium now, we're starting to explore different groups, you know, adult groups, rather than just this kind of like disengaged teenagers and stuff. And it really does bring home that point about, once people understand the learning process, the system and the curriculum doesn't matter. You know, most of the kids in the Inventorium stop actually using the platform content after about 6 months, and they're just negotiating tasks and projects with their teacher. The content's still there, it's a backup, they can refer back to it if something's particularly relevant, but they've generally found their point of curiosity and gone off on their own. And I think it's really interesting that that learning to learn becomes the really important bit, and that's why the teacher's the most important thing, because it's really not about the curriculum. They can find that content anywhere. Same at university, you know, so you write this very nice online course at university and you give readings and stuff, but actually people go off and find their own readings about what's interesting to them on the subject. And that's really what it should be about, that the process should be about inspiring the learner to learn.
Which I love, because obviously learning to learn is what I'm all about. So
absolutely,
you're after my own heart. We're going to that now. That's awesome. And I've absolutely loved having you here today, Eddie. And I know it's just going to keep going and take on new legs and continue doing the amazing work for those people that really need it. Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much for having me. It's nice to be able to talk openly about something without people feeling threatened by the notions of how it actually works in practice, because it does undo everything that, everything that we experienced, the parents experienced. It's a big step for people.
Yeah, and I think the first big step is always about acknowledging, because you can't actually address it until you accept what it is and why it's a problem. And then hopefully we can start looking at, well, how do we open that up so that it's not just the states do everything, but it becomes much more competitive, and therefore it becomes by default more quality focused, more outcomes focused, more student focused, which is what we want it to be.
Yeah. Thank you ever so much.
No worries. Thank you.